The year 2025 brought a big event to Africa. For the first time ever, the G20 Summit was held on African land. The city of Johannesburg in South Africa welcomed leaders from the world's biggest economies. This meeting happened on November 22nd and 23rd. It was a historic moment, as many hoped it would bring new ideas and solutions to global challenges. However, the air around the summit felt tense. Security was tight and the streets were quiet. Inside the large conference rooms, there was a mix of hope and worry. Everyone knew that many important issues needed to be discussed. These included how to stop climate change, how to help poor countries with their money problems, and how to use new technology like artificial intelligence fairly. The world watched, waiting to see if these powerful nations could work together. As the meeting began, a striking image caught everyone's eye. Some chairs at the main table were visibly empty. These seats were meant for leaders from some of the most powerful countries on Earth. Their absence made the hall feel less complete. It was a clear sign that not all major world powers were present. This unusual situation added to the difficult mood of the summit. The empty seats showed a challenge to global unity right from the start. The world needed countries to work together now more than ever. There was a big struggle between global fragmentation and the desperate need for unity. Some nations wanted to go their own way, making decisions only for themselves. Others believed that only by joining forces could the world solve its biggest problems. This G20 meeting in Johannesburg was therefore very important. It was a test of whether nations could put differences aside for the good of all. The stakes were high for the future of the planet and its people. 2. The missing leaders. The G20 summit began, but many important leaders were not there. This was a big and new problem for the global meeting. It changed how the summit felt and what it could do. Leaders from the United States, China, and Russia did not attend. This was very unusual. The United States President Donald Trump said that his country would not send any representatives. He said this was because of untrue stories about white people facing problems in South Africa. South African officials said these claims were false. President Trump's decision was a big move. It showed that the United States was choosing not to work with other countries in this important forum. The decision was a big blow. The world needed countries to work together now more than ever. This G20 meeting in Johannesburg was therefore very important. It was a test of whether nations could put differences aside for the good of all. The stakes were high for the future of the planet and its people. 2. The missing leaders. The G20 summit began, but many important leaders were not there. This was a big and new problem for the global meeting. It changed how the summit felt and what it could do. Leaders from the United States, China, and Russia did not attend. This was very unusual. The United States President Donald Trump said that his country would not send any representatives. He said this was because of untrue stories about white people facing problems in South Africa. South African officials said these claims were false. President Trump's decision was a big move. It showed that the United States was choosing not to work with other countries in this important forum. This was not a small choice. It looked like a purposeful step away from global cooperation. China's President Xi Jinping was also not at the meeting. China sent Premier Li Qiang to speak for the country. Russia's President Vladimir Putin did not come either. Russia sent its foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, instead. These absences were significant because these countries are very powerful in the world economy. Additionally, President Javier Milei from Argentina also decided to stay away. He chose to do this to support President Trump's boycott. Argentina's foreign minister, Pablo Quirno, attended in his place. In total, about one-third of the G20's main leaders were missing. This created a huge challenge for the summit. The G20's main purpose is for world leaders to meet and work together on big global issues. With so many important leaders absent, the summit's ability to make strong decisions was questioned. Its legitimacy, or its right to make global rules, became weaker. The lack of these key figures showed a shift in how countries were working together. It meant that some powerful nations preferred to act alone or in smaller groups. They were not fully engaged in this large global forum. This changed the usual way of talking between countries. The empty seats were a clear sign of growing fragmentation in the world. It showed that the idea of global unity was facing real difficulties when major powers chose to stay home. The summit had to find ways to move forward even without some of its most central voices. 3. South Africa leads the way. South Africa was ready to lead the G20 summit. President Cyril Ramaphosa became the G20 president on December 1, 2024. He set a clear main theme for the year: solidarity, equality, and sustainability. This theme showed South Africa's deep hopes for the meeting. It meant working together, treating everyone fairly, and protecting the planet for the future. Under this big theme, South Africa had 4 important goals. First, it wanted to make countries stronger when disasters like floods or droughts happen. It also aimed to improve how the world responds to these events. Second, it focused on helping low-income countries with their huge debts. Many poor nations struggle to pay back loans, which stops their growth. Third, South Africa worked on finding money for a just energy transition. This means moving to clean energy in a way that is fair for all countries, especially those that are still developing. Fourth, it looked at how to use important natural minerals to help everyone grow and develop, not just rich companies. Hosting such a large international event required a great effort and cost. The South African government spent around $691 million. This is about $38.7 million in US dollars. This money covered all the preparations for the G20 meetings held during the year. This investment showed South Africa's strong commitment to its leadership role. These goals were not random. They directly addressed the big problems faced by nations in Africa and other parts of the world known as the Global South. South Africa strongly believed that the world's biggest economies have a responsibility. They needed to correct the historical inequalities that have built up over hundreds of years of uneven economic relationships. The summit was designed to give a stronger voice to these developing nations. It was their chance to highlight their unique challenges and offer their solutions. This approach made the Johannesburg Summit special. It gave an important platform for developing nations to share their perspectives. For many, it was the first time they felt truly listened to at a G20 meeting. South Africa worked hard to put Africa's priorities right at the center of the global discussions. The main aim was to start fixing old unfairness in international development, making sure all nations can grow and prosper equally. 4. The Plan for the Planet. The G20 Summit in Johannesburg achieved something surprising. On its very first day, the leaders agreed on a long declaration. This document had 122 points laying out a plan for the world. It was unusual to adopt such a big statement so quickly, especially because the United States did not take part in its creation. This declaration covered many important global issues. Its main goals were to promote fairness among nations, reform international systems, and support sustainable development. A central part of this plan focused on the environment and climate change. The document used strong language showing how urgent leaders felt about protecting the planet. It called for countries to work towards net zero greenhouse gas emissions by the middle of this century. This means greatly reducing the amount of planet-warming gases released into the atmosphere, aiming for a balance where any remaining emissions are removed. The declaration also firmly supported the Paris Agreement. This important global accord aims to limit global warming. It seeks to keep the global average temperature increase to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, with efforts to restrict it even further to 1.5 degrees Celsius. This goal is crucial for avoiding the worst impacts of climate change. However, this strong stand on climate change caused a reaction from the United States. President Donald Trump, the current president, and his administration expressed their disapproval. A spokesperson from the White House publicly called the declaration shameful. This was because the document included strong commitments on climate change, which President Trump had often viewed with skepticism. Despite the absence of a major global power and its strong objections, the other G20 nations worked hard to reach an agreement. Getting all the present countries to sign the 122-point declaration required careful diplomatic work. They had to find a balance, using language that everyone could accept. This often meant making political compromises and using general terms that allowed different countries to interpret the commitments in a way that suited them. Through these careful negotiations, the leaders successfully put forth a unified vision for tackling global challenges, especially climate change, demonstrating a shared will among the nations present. 5. Money and new technology. The leaders at the summit also talked about money and new technology. This was an important part of making a fair future for all countries. They spoke about critical minerals, which are materials needed for many new technologies, like phones and electric cars. Many developing nations have these critical minerals, but often they only sell the raw materials to richer countries. The leaders at the G20 agreed that this must change. They want to process these minerals themselves. This means making finished products from the raw materials in their own countries. This way, they can keep more of the money and create jobs. Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva spoke strongly about this. He said that countries with many minerals should not just be suppliers of raw materials. They should control the knowledge and the extra value that comes from their resources. He warned against digital colonialism, where richer countries control new technologies and leave others behind. The summit also discussed artificial intelligence, or AI. Leaders wanted to make sure AI helps everyone, not just a few rich nations. India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, asked for AI to be human-focused. He wanted everyone to have fair access to powerful computers and learn digital skills. India plans to hold a special summit on AI in early 2026 to help with this goal. China's Premier Li Cheng said that countries need to work together on new technologies. He spoke about careful use of AI. South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung also shared this view. He said that AI should give equal chances to all people and all countries. He warned against creating new situations where some countries are far ahead in technology and others are left behind. Indonesia's Vice President Gibran Rakabuming Raka gave an example of how technology can help. He talked about Indonesia's QRIS digital payment system. It is a cheap way to let more people join the economy and help produce big differences in wealth. The vision for developing nations was clear. They want to control their own economic future. This means making their own products from their own resources, adding value, and using new technologies like AI in a fair way. They want to build strong economies that benefit all their people, avoiding old patterns where they only supplied raw goods or were left out of new tech progress. 6. Helping poor countries. The G20 Summit seriously discussed the problem of large debts in the global South. Many developing countries owe a lot of money. It is very difficult for them to pay these debts back. This financial burden stops them from making important investments in their own countries. They cannot build new schools, improve healthcare, or create new jobs when so much money goes to debt payments. This crisis affects millions of people and slows down progress for whole regions. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed shared his thoughts on this urgent matter. He stressed that any debt relief for these nations must directly help their people. He said that money saved from debt should be used for development projects that truly make a difference, not just disappear into other costs. He argued that helping these countries is not just about charity. It is about making the global economy work better for everyone. This includes ensuring fairness in how money is lent and borrowed worldwide. Jamaica's Prime Minister Andrew Michael Holness also spoke about the special challenges faced by poor countries. He highlighted how climate disasters like big storms and floods hit developing nations the hardest. One bad storm can destroy years of economic growth and progress, pushing countries back into poverty. He explained that these countries often did not cause climate change, but they suffer the most from it. They need help to recover and become stronger against future natural events. A key point of discussion was the high cost for African nations to borrow money. These countries often pay much higher interest rates than wealthier European countries. For example, African countries pay an average of 12% interest, while countries in Europe pay only around 3.8%. This big difference makes it very expensive for poorer countries to get the funds they need for important projects. They called for more equal access to money at fair and affordable rates, so they are not always paying more. The leaders also pushed for important changes to major international financial organizations. They wanted to reform institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. The goal was to make these powerful bodies better serve the needs of developing countries. Many felt these institutions need to listen more to the voices of the Global South. By changing how these organizations work, they can better support countries struggling with debt and help them achieve a more stable economic future. This reform would ensure a fairer international financial system for all. 7. The problem with the handover. The G20 Summit in Johannesburg was coming to an end. It was time for a special tradition. At the close of every summit, the leader of the host country officially passes a gavel. This gavel goes to the leader of the country that will host the next G20 Summit. This act shows the change in leadership for the important global group. This year, the United States was going to be the next host. Normally, the U.S. President or another very important official would be there to receive the gavel. But for the Johannesburg Summit, this did not happen. The United States government made a decision not to send a high-ranking person to the ceremony. Instead, they offered to have an official from their embassy in South Africa accept the gavel. This official would have a much lower rank than a president or a top government minister. South African officials did not like this idea. They felt it was not respectful. President Cyril Ramaphosa, as the host leader, believed it was wrong to hand over the important G20 gavel to someone who was not a senior leader. For him, the ceremony needed a leader-to-leader transfer to show its true meaning and importance. Because of this disagreement, the usual ceremony did not take place. There was no physical passing of the gavel from South Africa to the United States. The end of the summit felt strange and cold. It was not the smooth, traditional closing that everyone expected. In his final words to close the summit, President Ramaphosa spoke about the next presidency. He said simply, "This gavel of this G20 summit officially concludes this gathering and now transitions to the next of the G20, which is the United States, where we will reconvene next year." He only mentioned the United States taking over. He did not give any more details about the handover problem. This short verbal announcement was the only public sign of the transfer. The unusual end of the summit showed the deep problems and disagreements that had been present throughout the meeting. It was a clear sign of the ongoing lack of unity among some of the world's biggest powers. 8. What comes next? The Johannesburg G20 Summit showed both good and bad outcomes. On one hand, the nations present adopted a long declaration with 122 points. This document covered important topics like fighting climate change, helping poor countries with their large debts, and managing new technologies such as artificial intelligence. This agreement was a sign that many countries can still find common ground and work on global issues together. This was a diplomatic success for South Africa and the other participating nations. However, the summit also highlighted serious divisions within the G20 group. Key leaders from the United States, China, and Russia were absent. This meant that some of the world's largest economies were not fully part of the talks. This created a strange situation. Countries agreed on many goals, but the absence of major powers challenged the idea of true global unity. It raised questions about the strength and purpose of the G20 itself. If major global players are not at the table, how effective can any agreements truly be? This showed a clear paradox. Consensus was reached, but the institution felt fractured. The G20 was created to bring world leaders together to solve big economic and political challenges. But when important members do not participate, it makes the group's job much harder. It makes us ask if global problems like the climate crisis or debt for developing nations can really be solved if powerful countries choose to stay away. The Johannesburg meeting revealed a widening gap in how nations approach working together on a global scale. Looking to the future, the next G20 Summit in 2026 will be hosted by the United States. President Donald Trump has said it will take place at his private golf club in Doral, Florida. This choice is very unusual and could cause new problems for diplomatic rules and security. Hosting such a global event at a private place might also suggest a focus on national interests over wider global cooperation. The U.S. presidency will likely shift the G20's main topics, possibly focusing more on security and trade rather than the development issues that African nations championed. These events make people wonder if true global unity can survive in a world with such deep political divisions. The major challenges facing our planet require all nations to work as one. But the G20 summit in Johannesburg showed how hard this can be. What do you think this summit means for how countries will work together in the future?
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world.